everyone, and welcome back to another video. In case I haven't already been loud enough about this, I have just recently been diagnosed with ADHD. I have an ADHD brain and I am medicated for it. I also have my master's in exercise science. And so today I thought it would be really interesting to see if there's any literature out there within exercise science that talks about how exercise or physical activity can help ADHD and hopefully help to reduce some of the symptoms. And if there is research on it, what kind of exercise should we be doing? How much of it should we be doing? Does it work at all? The disco ball was reflecting all the light. Oh, so beautiful and sunny. And at the end of this video, I'm going to be sharing with you all my experience of trying to apply all of the guidelines that I've learned about in the research that I'm about to show you. So anecdotally, we'll have a little bit more evidence to see if it even really works. And then hopefully with this video and by looking at some of the research, if ADHD is something that affects you, then you might be able to come up with a few ideas of things that you could try and implement to try and help you manage your life and manage your brain a little bit better. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about what the research says exercise could do for people with ADHD. Well, we've seen that people who are unmedicated and how they can show significant improvements and changes within their ADHD symptoms. We can see that people who did moderate to intense exercise found that it helped to facilitate inhibition, which in translation means that it made them a little bit less impulsive, which can be a really common symptom in ADHD brains. I notice my impulsivity when I'm speaking to somebody and I just want to get my point and my part of the conversation in, and I have a really hard time waiting for somebody to finish, spending all my energy thinking about when I could say my next thing. So if it facilitates inhibition, that might be really positive. In kids who did moderate intensity activity, there seemed to be an improvement in cognitive performance when testing executive and attentional function. I don't know about you guys and how you experience ADHD, but for me at least, a really big part of what makes mine debilitating is that it's very difficult to initiate tasks or to start things. And so that's how the executive dysfunction shows up for me. So if exercise could be used to help illustrate some sort of improvement in this area, then that's a really positive thing. Now we've gone through that quickly and that does seem to be pretty positive, right? Now, on the other hand, some research has shown some pretty negative findings. So maybe this means that exercise would be best used in conjunction with other treatment methods like CBT or medication. And a lot of the research on exercise and ADHD does seem to point to the fact that it might be a little bit more effective in kids than it would be in adults. And that doesn't help me, that doesn't help my friend. And this could have something to do with the fact that ADHD is still viewed as like a neurodivergence that only kids have. Like when I was diagnosed and I was looking up what ADHD meant for me, literally every website was like what to do if your child has ADHD, how to best help your child, how to manage your child, alternative treatment methods for your child with ADHD. There was so little research on adult ADHD. And while I'm so happy and it is so wonderful that there are that many resources out there for kids and families who are struggling with their ADHD, that didn't really help me. And I'm sure it didn't really help many of you. So with that being said, some research did show that in adults who did 40 minutes of moderate exercise, there was also an increased inhibition, so kind of reducing that impulsivity, and that's pretty cool. But unfortunately with the adults, improvements in the task switching or working memory were not observed. Generally speaking, in neurotypical brains, there has been a fairly substantial amount of research that does show that exercise helps learning and helps memory. So if it doesn't work in ADHD, it could mean that there's something else going on, or it could mean that we just need to do a little bit more research. The idea behind trying to research ADHD and exercise is because of the neurotransmitter and the hormone response that is triggered when we exercise. And the broad kind of concept is that physical activity might play a physiological role similar to that of stimulant medication because it increases things like dopamine and norepinephrine. And neurotransmitters like dopamine or norepinephrine play a major role in regulating the attention system. And so increasing these with the acute exercise is the kind of preliminary scientific explanation as to why exercise might help ADHD brains. As an exercise scientist, from an exercise physiology point of view, if this is the general concept, then I have a few ideas that could go with that. If our goal is increasing dopamine and norepinephrine, then we need to do higher intensity exercise. So I want you to think of things like lifting heavy weights or doing high intensity interval training. Even just doing resistance training in general, acute bouts of that can increase your dopamine and your norepinephrine response. It may not remain elevated, but it certainly increases those neurotransmitters and those hormones for a short amount of time. How much we can increase that hormonal or that neurotransmitter response is related to the type of exercise we do, the amount of muscle mass we use, how much exercise we do, and the intensity at which we do it. Another thing that can also affect those kind of acute changes in our physiology are the rest intervals that we use. So if we do something like a big, heavy compound movement like a deadlift, then we're likely going to have a bigger increase in our dopamine and norepinephrine. We're going to have a larger acute change in our hormonal environment. Taking shorter rest intervals might also trigger that higher neurophysiological response. I've said that like 3 times and I couldn't make it sound any smoother than that, so there you go. But if you take short rest intervals, even though you might get more acute hormonal changes, it's going to affect how much you can lift, right? If you take a longer rest, then you'll be able to lift heavier and get that higher response. But if you take a shorter rest, this might not affect the overall volume or amount of work that you can do, but it'll certainly change the intensity at which you can do it. So I would use the rest intervals as a way of increasing that neurotransmitter response. I'd use that with caution. And this kind of response is seen with cardio as well. Norepinephrine increases markedly with increasing exercise intensity. So it's usually at about 50% of the VO2 max, we see a really big increase in that norepinephrine. And epinephrine increases at 75% of VO2 max. So potentially high intensity cardio work or heavy high intensity resistance training might be really helpful for our ADHD brains. That's my theory anyways. But let's keep looking at the research to see if there's any specific guidelines that we can find that'll help us make a program. This paper found that more frequent exercise led to better executive functioning, including inhibition, planning, working memory, and processing speed. And here we found that 90 minutes of exercise 2 times per week helped children to have greater improvements in their ADHD rating scales. For adults, a 20-minute bout of moderate intensity cycle exercise helped adults to reduce confusion, fatigue, and depression. But unfortunately, in those adults, it did not show changes in the vigilance or hyperactivity. The research also shows that what kind of activity we do might have an impact on exercise's helpfulness to our ADHD brains. Open motor skills, so things like team sports, are where we're having to respond to a changing environment or continuously new stimulus, where there's a diversity in responses that we could give and there's a time pressure on it. Well, those open motor skills actually seem to be really beneficial to our attentional problems, and it does demand a higher level of executive control. ADHD brains really love novel things, they like challenges, and they like things that have deadlines. So maybe team sports are a really good way of working with those unique requirements of ADHD brains. When we do closed motor skills, so for example, going for a walk on a treadmill or going for a walk outside, the research shows particularly when we're surrounded by greenery or by nature, and this does seem to be quite helpful for us. Research suggests that a walk in a park can help young kids to concentrate better. The language of this I don't love because ADHD brains can be really good at hyper-focusing on things. So it's not the inability to concentrate, it's more so the inability to regulate where that concentration is directed. At least that's what I found in my experience. And so while all of this is well and good, let's look at collating this information and putting it into a program or a set of guidelines so that we can all apply this to our own lives or maybe even make an exercise program. I found this paper that summarizes a lot of the different aspects of the literature that's out there currently. So we're going to utilize that. The guidelines are therefore, number 1, we want moderate intensity cardiovascular activity, so about 65 to 75% of our VO2 max. We want 30 to 40 minutes of exercise a day, 4 to 5 days a week. The general recommendation is that exercise as frequently as possible with occasional bursts of intensity. And we want heavy or high volume resistance training so that we can elicit that greater hormonal response. And then, if like me, you're taking medication as well, here are some guidelines to help us make the most of that medication and maybe potentially even help it last a bit longer. Because remember, when I'm presenting this, I'm not saying that physical activity should be a replacement to medication. That's not my scope of practice, that's not my profession, and that's not what the literature seems to point to. The literature does seem to point to using physical activity as complementary to medication. So the guidelines in this paper suggested that you work out in the morning to take advantage of that cognitive boost that physical activity can provide. The second recommendation is that you take medication a couple hours after your physical activity so that you can benefit from that boost and then also be productive for longer because that medication will last a little bit longer. So for me, my medication lasts around 8 hours, and sometimes I take a top-up dose towards the end of my 8-hour medication, like a shorter acting training dose so that I'm able to continue my work day and get all the work that I need to done. In a perfect world for me, I think like a 12-hour dose would be okay. And I've tried Concerta before, but it just didn't really work for me. So if these guidelines were able to help me increase the amount of time that my ADHD symptoms were lessened, then that would be really great. This paper also has some other thoughts on things that might affect ADHD brains. And I'd love to know what you guys think, because I didn't really know. And these are things like a need for variety. Absolutely. For me, I love novel stimulus. I like things to be new. That's what makes me excited and makes me feel like I'm gonna get it done. They said a need for structure and a need to learn new things and a need to measure outcomes. And drawing from my experience, again, that's the only place that I can speak from. I'm not really sure that I agree with all of these, but some of them definitely ring true. Like I said, that need for variety. Like for example, even though it says 30 to 40 minutes of cardiovascular or exercise a day, that doesn't mean I'm just gonna like go run for 30 minutes a day, because I would be so bored, or go walk on a treadmill or go cycle on a bike for 30 minutes of a day. That just, I feel bored and drained thinking about that. The need to learn new things I thought was really interesting. I think that absolutely rings true. Like I get excited when I try out a new exercise or when I try out a new training method or a new like set or program structure. And I know that sounds super nerdy, but that's what excites me. The need for structure is the one that I struggle with, because I need a balance between, yeah, having some sort of routine, but then also when I'm in a routine, I feel like I'm so bored and my brain's gonna explode because it's just bleh. Let's get into seeing how these guidelines worked for me this week. Because now at this point, you will have definitely noticed that throughout the video, there's been little clips of me exercising, and that has been me trying to put into practice all of the things that I've said to you today. And it has been a challenge because I'm not an early bird. I am a bit of a sleepy worm. So waking up and working out in the morning has been new to me, and I'm not sure I'm gonna stick with that. I don't know. Recorded some of my thoughts immediately after I got home from the gym or got home from my workout so that you guys could see exactly how I thought the exercise affected my ADHD symptoms at that point in time. Hello, I'm back from the gym just now and I have a few thoughts. This is day one. It really sucked this morning. I'm not a morning person, and I think that the issue with gymming before your medication is that it's really difficult to initiate that movement or to do anything. Callum also went to the gym with me, and I think that if he wasn't there, I don't even know if I would have gone, because like starting to do things is really, really tough before I've had meds. Afterwards, now though, I do feel pretty good. I chose to lift weights and I just did like a lot of volume. So I did a lot of sets and reps, not necessarily anything heavy. I do feel pretty good. I feel pretty motivated right now. I really didn't want to be excited about this or feel like it was different, but I do feel, yeah, I feel pretty good. I feel like having the time pressure of the fact that Callum had to go to work, so we had to leave the house by like a certain time, that helps. Again, if it was just me by myself, I don't know if I would have been able to initiate that. I'm gonna have something to eat and then I'm gonna have the medicine, so I'm gonna try and wait. It's been about half an hour since I finished the workout. I'll try and get to like an hour, which is kind of in line with the guidelines, but I've got work to do. I've just had something to eat, so I'm sorry if I've got stuff in my face, in my mouth. And now that I'm sitting here, I'm definitely like, I'm flagging a little bit, and that kind of like, yay, exercise has worn off, and I'm just like, I could very easily just not move from this chair right now. But I think that it's worked in the respect that like, this is already like an hour and a half or so later than I would take my medication normally. So it'll extend my work day, so to speak, because I'm taking it later. I'm gonna have the medication now, I think, so that's about an hour after I finish working out, not two. And I did not get up to work out in the morning. Like I suspected, not having somebody to do that with made it so that I wasn't gonna do it. If I had medication beforehand, then I think I would have gone in the morning, but I didn't. And I think that's the reality of, I really, really struggle to initiate things before I've had medication. What I did do is go in the evening, which I actually enjoyed. I've spoken about this before, but the main side effect that I have with my medication is that I really crash as soon as it wears off. So say I take it at 9, at about 5 p.m. I'm like passed out, or I could pass out. By working out in the evening and by starting to move, and like I had to walk to the gym at like 4:30 to be there at 5, for example, that actually helped the crashing symptoms to be way lessened. Because I'm still on my medication, I was still able to initiate like getting to the gym. So I got there by myself, and and it mediated a lot of those crash symptoms. So I'm thinking maybe that's a way that it could help me, not necessarily the morning workouts. The last thing I wanted to touch on that's been my experience this week is the fact that the cardio recommendations for ADHD brains are to do quite high intensity stuff, which is fine. Another one of the things that I notice that has changed from prior medication to on medication is the fact that my heart rate is much higher than it typically would be at rest. So doing high intensity cardio makes it so that it feels like my heart rate is going through the roof. And I know that I'm safe. I'm an exercise scientist. I know that that's okay, but it can be quite disconcerting and it can make you feel like really anxious. And so that was my experience as well. I wouldn't necessarily choose to do high intensity exercise all the time as my main form of cardio because of the fact that my heart rate responds in that way. And when I'm by myself at the gym, and that can be really nerve-wracking. Like, I suffer with anxiety and ADHD, and just the combo of those two things, I'm smiling, but that's really challenging. And it can be hard to work out and feel like you're getting benefits from working out when you feel like it's triggering the same kind of like physiological response as like a panic attack. And I might be alone in that, but that's been my experience as well. So I understand that the guidelines are there because of the like physiological reasons behind working out, as in like if you do high intensity exercise, you're going to get more dopamine and norepinephrine response. But I think in practice, a lot of those things don't necessarily work for me. Would they work for you guys? I'd love to know what you think. So you can see that has been my experience over the week, guys. Some days I think it worked, some days it may not have worked as well. And I do think there are some issues to these guidelines. Sometimes I think the treatments for ADHD are just really not ADHD friendly. Like, you have to remember to take your medication every day, or you have to book a doctor's appointment. And these are things that are like mundane, and they just sometimes don't get done. That's been my experience. I'd love to know what works for you guys. Do you have any other treatments or things that you do complementary to your medication to help you manage your ADHD symptoms? If you try out any of the techniques in this video, I would love to know, because I think we need some more research, guys, and I think we need even some more anecdotal evidence. How does it affect you guys? Please leave a comment down below, and if you're able to, please like, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new content. I hope you guys have an amazing week ahead, and I will see you all very soon. Bye, everybody.